Good morning. Today and on Wednesday we'll look at Kripke's reading of Wittgenstein in these central passages in the investigation. Okay, so today I'll just set out what I take Kripke's basic picture is of what's going on here. And start out by looking at what he calls the skeptical paradox. So suppose you consider your own present use of the word plus. 3 plus 4 is 7 and all that. The notion you first learned all those many years ago. So I guess we have all done a certain number of actual additions in the past, but most of us, well, for any of us, there will be some large number such that we haven't done any additions beyond that number, if you see what I mean. You might have added 1 million and 1 million and got 2 million, but there's going to be some number that you never got up to, because some numbers are very, very large, right? So Kripke supposes that it's 57, that you've never added beyond 57, but I know that we're all hyper-sophisticated, and many of you will probably have added beyond 57 at some point, but if you think 57 is not the right number for you, then just pencil in 10 Googles or whatever your favourite large number, whatever you think the number might be that you never got beyond. So here are two hypotheses as to what you meant by plus when you used it in the past. One is you meant addition. The other is, when you were using plus in the past, what you meant was quos. And here's what quos means. X quos y is the same as x plus y if x and y are both less than 57. Follow me very closely. And if either x or y is identical to or greater than 57, then x quos y is 5. Okay, so let's just do a couple of exercises. What's 5 plus 3? 8. What's 5 quos 3? 8. Very good. What's 56 plus 1? What's 56 quos 1? Very good. What's 57 quos 1? Okay. Okay. Well, right. So here are two hypotheses as to what you meant in the past when you were using plus. That you meant addition or that you meant quos. And the trouble is to see how we're going to decide between them. I suppose, for example, that in the past you always meant plus. Suppose we just take for granted that you always meant plus, but I assigned the meaning quos to the plus sign. Is there going to be any difference between us? Well, let's break it down. Would there be any difference in the answers that you and I had given to any particular calculations? There would?
Oh, you mean if you had never added that?
Above 57. Right, remember that we're taking 57 to be a very large number. Right, I mean, and if you don't like 57 for that purpose, take 10 to the 57. Yeah. Okay, so would there be any difference in the answers we'd given to any particular calculations? No, because for everything below 57, then we only added up below 57, and for everything up to 57, x plus y and x cos y give the same answer. So there'd be no difference there. So there's no difference in what answers we've given to any particular sums. You mean plus, I mean quos, but when we use the cross sign, we'd both have given the same answers to any particular calculation. So where would the difference between us be if you meant plus and I meant quos? Because after all, I might say, well, by the cross sign, I mean addition. You say, oh, that's funny, by the cross sign, I meant addition too. We use the same word, addition. Right? So what's going through our mind when they do these calculations is just the same. You look at 56 plus 1 and say 57. I look at 56 plus 1 and I say 57. And what's going through our minds is just the same when we do those calculations. So everything that went through our minds in the past when we were using the cross sign was just the same. So we agreed in the answers we gave to every particular calculation, and what was running through our minds as we did it was the same. And Kripke says, well, was there any past fact about me that mandates what that you meant about what you meant by plus, that mandates what you should do now? Well, there's no telling the difference between you and me, whether you meant plus or whether you meant quas. Like what is the difference? There isn't any difference between you and me. You meant one thing and I meant the other. So if you ask, was there anything in your past life that commits you to saying 59 when you're asked what 57 plus 2 is, rather than 5? The answer is no. Because I meant plus all the time, and it's fine for me to say 5. But you only had it going through your head or in the answers you gave just the same thing I did. So there wasn't any past fact about you that was committing you, that was mandating you to give one answer rather than another now. So there's nothing that makes it the case that you meant plus rather than quas. There isn't any difference between us. And similarly, if that's what's true about the past, the same is true right now. If you ask about what is running through your head right now, there's nothing about you right now that makes it so that you currently mean addition rather than quaddition by the plus sign. But this is pretty far-reaching, this, because you could construct this kind of example for any sign, whatever. Here's Kripke. Wittgenstein thinks that any construal that looks for something in my present mental state to differentiate between my meaning addition or quaddition, or that will show that in the future I should say 125 when asked about 68 plus 57, is there anything in my present mental state that will differentiate addition or quaddition, meaning addition or quaddition, or implying that I've got to say 125 rather than 5? That's a misconstrual. That's attributing to the ordinary person a notion of meaning that's refuted by these skeptical arguments. By the skeptical argument, he means the kind of thing we've just been working through already today and last week, where you say, well, what could there be in the actual calculations you made, in your actual behavior, or in what was running through your mind? Could there be anything there that would differentiate meaning addition or quaddition, or dictating that the right answer is 125? And I'm saying there's nothing there. But that is a really radical conclusion. It seems the argument is very, very simple and very, very forceful, but it implies that there's nothing in your mind right now that constitutes you meaning one thing rather than another by the sign. I just set it up for addition and quaddition, but obviously you could do this again and again for endlessly many different possible meanings for the sign. Consider the notion of zaddition, which you get for 58 when you substitute 58 for 57, or vaddition when you substitute 60 for 57. You see what I mean? There is endlessly many alternative possibilities here. So there's nothing in your mental state that constitutes you meaning one thing rather than another by the sign. But if that's right, then there's no such thing as anyone presently assigning any particular meaning to the cross. But the argument's obviously quite general. You could do this for any sign at all. If you take a notion like chair, where you mean by chair just what we regularly, by the word chair, you just mean a regular chair. When I say chair, I mean a word that applies to anything if it's a chair that's been observed before the year 2013, But come 2013, it will apply only to zebras. Is there anything in our minds that will differentiate between what you mean by chair and what I mean by chair? Nothing in which objects we've applied the word chair to in the past, and nothing in what was running through our minds when we were using the term in the past. So you could do this for any term, whatever. So there's no such thing as anyone presently assigning any particular meaning to the plus sign, or indeed to any other sign, given the great generality of the argument. The argument is so simple. So here's Kripke. Wittgenstein's main problem is that it appears that he has shown all language and all concept formation to be impossible, indeed unintelligible. I mean, it's not that there's something very difficult here that we wish we could do. It's that when you think through what it is that would be that success would be, you see you can't make any sense of it. There's no such thing as being successful. There's no such thing as meaning. Yep.
Can't we, though, take into consideration the kinds of restrictions that plus would put on these summations that the plus sign wouldn't? I mean, certainly there's nothing in the anything being before 57 that would be different. But when faced with the plus sign, we can test the kinds of additions that we can put that are past 57, and we can see that they do yield different answers.
Right.
And so so it seems just like that anything prior or anything below 57 is just ambiguous, but that doesn't mean that we mean that there is no practical matter about it.
Yeah, well, once you and I actually do use the plus sign for in connection with numbers that are above 57, then you'll go one way and I'll go another. Yep. But the question is, was there anything in what was in our minds before we got above the 57 that dictated our going one way rather than another? The previous examples on which we agreed don't dictate our going one way rather than another. And for any general formula, like, well, by the plus sign I mean addition, you and I can both agree on that. Right? That's like that thing about the x plus 1 that just is dragged around after the particular examples. If you were asked what you meant by addition, you'd say, well, 0 plus 1 is 1, 0 plus 2 is 2, and so on. You'd give lots of examples. If you asked me what I meant by addition, I'd say 0 plus 1 is 1, and I'd give the same examples as you, below 57. Yeah. So then the question is, before we get up to these high numbers above 57, was there anything in what was happening then that dictated that you should go one way and I should go the other? And that's the point. If the answer to that is no, then it seems like we have a completely free choice when we get to 57, you and I. There was nothing that dictated that you meant one thing rather than the other. But that's already to give you the conclusion. Carry on.
It seems like, though, even if you're below 57, that you can still have the notion of plus as opposed to question line. It may not make a difference, but you can still be thinking about it.
You could still have in mind plus addition rather than quaddition.
So if you take the set of all numbers,
Uh-huh.
I mean, obviously you can't.
That's a lot, yes.
Numbers at once, but you think numbers prior or below and above 57, you're going to use plus as opposed to plus.
Right.
And so even though for numbers below 57, it may not make a difference, for all the numbers that you're worried about, you're going to use plus. And in the cases below 57, it just happens to be a coincidence. That is the same as plus.
Your task is to show that there's something different going on in your mind and in my mind even before we start adding the high numbers. Right?
Right.
Okay. So what was the difference?
The difference was that in my mind, I'm taking the numbers below 57 as a part of a larger set.
Right.
And so even though in the cases below 57, it doesn't make a material difference, I still have, I guess in the background somewhere, that I'm using plus instead of plus.
In my mind. Well, the thing is, for me to be using quas, right, I need not be using an explicit definition like that. When you say addition, I mean, it is possible to define addition, yeah? But usually when a regular person is using addition, they're not using some fancy set theoretical definition of what addition is. Yeah? Addition is just a primitive. So for me, quas is just a primitive. It's not defined in terms of anything. And when we find out what's going on, I might say, oh, when you're using the plus sign, you're using some really, really weird notion. You mean, what you mean is x plus y is x quas y if they're less for x y less than 57, and you've got some really weird notion here. If x y are greater than or equal to 57, then you're going to say this is x zaddition y, right? Where zaddition is x quas y zaddition is 0 if x and y are less than 57, and x plus y if x and y are greater than or equal to 57. So I see you're using this really weird defined notion, right? How peculiar. Yeah, I was just thinking of the whole set of numbers and coaddition and addition for all of them. Yeah, you had this funny defined notion. We're both regarding them as primitive, but you regard addition as primitive. I regard coaddition as primitive. Yeah, neither of us regards it as a defined notion, but each of us can regard the other as defining some weird counterintuitive defined notion.
And it still seems weird because you can articulate that. I mean, you can give a rule.
That's right.
In most normal cases, you might think that it is simple just because most people don't give a definition for addition or simple addition or addition. But it's still possible. I mean,
that's right. It is possible to articulate these things, yeah, but you've got to rely on a primitive notion of addition that for you is addition, if you see what I mean, and for me is coaddition. You take addition as primitive, I take coaddition as primitive. What's possible in both cases is definition. But definition always depends on what stock of primitives you have. Yeah.
Can I respond to that?
Yes, sure.
So it seems saying that if two people are quasing and plussing, even in the lower numbers where their answers are the same,
Yeah.
the quasser still has some concept of quas lingering in the back of his head.
Right.
But I think that's a mistake because there's a difference between defining the way the function works on all inputs
Yes.
and then applying that function to specific inputs to give an output, right? So if I say x plus 3 and then I give you 2, you say 5, right? So in addition, we have different rules for adding fractions, right? We're thinking about finding the lowest common denominator, all this stuff. But when I'm adding 2 plus 3 is 5, I'm not thinking about what I do with fractions.
No, that's true.
So similarly, a quasser isn't thinking about what they do with numbers greater than 57.
Right. If I'm following you, then the point is that someone using quas might be just, how should I say, if you're asked, what's 23 plus 2, most of us would just, as you might say, unthinkingly say 25. It's not that you run through some backup operation here. And you're saying similarly for the quasser, when they say, what's 23 quas 2? They don't do some calculation. They just say 25. They don't need to explicitly look and say, are they less than 57? They don't consult a definition. They don't do anything like that. They just unthinkingly say 25. Yeah, I think that's exactly the picture. That's right. Yeah.
So I understand the difference between a function and applying the function
Yeah.
in particular cases. But all the same, you can have a function. So the point you made here is that you can have different notions of what's primitive.
Yes,
You can still
right.
articulate what's primitive. You can still have that in your mind, and you could test that against what somebody else articulates as primitive. So you say, I'm weird because I'm using plus, and really the primitive thing is plus.
Yeah.
But I could still say to you that really the primitive thing is plus and not plus, and so we can have an argument about that.
Right. Well, we could, if we could get to that point. But the thing is, when you say we can make that explicit, or you can articulate it, what the primitive thing is, yeah. Well, the thing is, what do you say is the primitive thing? If you're, how can I put this, a regular guy? How would you put what your primitive is? You say addition, right? Yep. Well, the thing is, that's what I say. I say it's addition. And there isn't any definition to appeal to here. Yeah, because they're both taking it. You say, well, when I say addition, I mean something primitive. And I say, sure, when I say addition, I mean something primitive. So it's not clear what articulate means here with a primitive. Or it doesn't mean give a definition. So there are people behind you wanting to come in and just this, I think. Yeah, 1, 2. Yeah.
So, just one response to this is, I think, a little bit like the difference to argument. So, I mean, I see what you mean by there is a difference between the rules that you just stressed. But yeah, how do you differentiate the primitive addition prior to 57? Well, addition and plus prior to 57 from, yes or thus or all of these different kinds. I mean, in saying that there is, in trying to more distinguish, I would see that all of these other notions, like plus, just depend on this primitive notion of plus. And that you couldn't build plus, sort of, you couldn't build plus hello or yes or yes, because, this is plus.
Sorry, can you do that louder?
I feel like she may have answered me, I'm not.
Okay.
All right, Paul.
There was one other person behind you wanted to do.
Can't we show that like plus has inherent contradictions that plus doesn't? Plus is wrong with
Quas has inherent contradictions.
Well, you could go with identity relations. You go, okay, 50 plus 7 is 57.
Right.
So those two are identical. So 50
No, wait a minute. Oh, 50 plus 7 is identical to 57. Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And you go, all right, well then 50 plus 7 plus 1 is 58. And that works in those systems. So you go, okay.
No, wait a minute.
Yeah, 50 plus 7 plus 1.
It's only a piece of
Yeah, you have to make up your mind. There are two different calculations you might mean by 50 plus 7
Okay,
plus
well,
1.
you go with 51 plus 7. Which should be
Okay. Is 58, right?
Yeah. But then you do 57 plus 1,
Uh-huh.
and you get 5.
Right?
And that's a contradiction.
Is that right? How come that's a where's a contradiction? Contradiction is P and not P, right? Okay. Do it. Get me to...
Well, then since you can only do 2 places, you just go backwards. You go, look, 50 is 50 plus 1 is equal to 51, so that's showing that you just added 1.
50 plus 1 is 51, right?
So that's showing that you just added 1 to the second step, and then you go that. Yeah.
This thing is hopeless. The best you can hope for is that I get confused. But so look, if you look at the if you go just a second, look, if you go back to the definition of quas, right? This is perfectly well defined. There really isn't a contradiction in this. And if you just think of that as you really might want to construct a function like that in doing some mathematical problem, some simple arithmetical problem. Yeah? No reason why not. It just is well defined. And I think that I mean, I don't want to force you to go on this too long, but I really don't think, I really don't see how you could be getting a contradiction there. It would be an absolute revolution if you did. I mean, if from a simple definition like that looks perfectly sensible, you could generate a contradiction. There is more to say about this, but I think it's not going to take. There's more to say about how you might get into difficulty here, trying to use quas, but I don't think it's going to take the form of just generating something in the form P and not P. I don't see how that could happen. Well, one, two.
This is really an answer to Kripke, but I think there's kind of an interesting way in which quas, you could at least think of quas as not primitive. So understanding primitive as whether or not you can define something in terms of something else.
Right.
Quas can be defined in terms of our normal notion of addition, but the opposite is not true. You can't fully define the function of addition for all numbers with just the notion of plus and the numbers themselves.
I don't see why not. I mean, so long as you have a notion like zaddition, where x and y, x zad y, x zus y is 0 if x and y are less than 57, right? And if otherwise, x zus y is x plus y, right? So then ordinary addition.
You're defining it in terms of two terms.
That's right.
So you're saying that
That's right, but quaddition.
and thus together are more primitive than.
Addition, yeah.
So, but still, on a certain understanding of primitive, I think we can see addition being.
That's right. On the understanding of primitive, on which addition is primitive,
Right.
right, then addition is more primitive, sure. But the whole trouble is who gets to say what's primitive. Yeah. And it's kind of more basic than that. It's that once you acknowledge that wherever you do, some signs are primitive, what gives those primitive signs their meanings? And the thing is, what happens in a finite set of initial cases isn't enough to give those signs their meanings. And since they're not defined signs, there's no general formula you can appeal to as what gives them their meanings. So it really is it's a very simple problem, but it's very general. 1, 2, yeah.
So this is actually going back to Wittgenstein. It's not totally obvious to me that in order to talk about addition of +1, we really need to be able to think about infinitely many terms. So it seems like we could actually fully define that relation actually by considering just a finite number of terms. So in particular, when you think back to how you learned to add larger numbers in grade school, you always do it with this, you have 571, and then you write the 20 below it, and you write the line and the plus, And then you do that addition by doing addition on just 2 digits.
Right, yes.
So it seems like the only rules you really need are, or at least possibly the only rules you really need are just the addition of the numbers 0 through 9, this rule of carrying over, and I mean, maybe the tricky part in defining this is getting someone to understand that no matter how many places there are, you have to keep applying the same rules. But it seems like even then, we could possibly explain that.
Yeah. Well, look, in one sense, of course, you're perfectly right that we do seem to manage to explain meaning by just a finite number through just a finite number of examples. But the trouble here is coming when you say, but what's going on when you say now just carry on in the same way? If you remember the add 1 example, yeah, I mean, which doesn't have this kind of breakdown. You see what I mean? Well, maybe it does have this kind of breakdown. But the thing is, that kind of breakdown there clearly doesn't help, because when you give us finite number of examples, and then you say just keep doing the same thing, and then the deviant insists. I mean, this is what eccentrics always say. I'm just doing the same thing. I don't understand why other people act so weird. Yeah. I say, look, I am doing the same thing. I'm doing just what you showed me in these initial examples.
But it seems like the worry there was that, and the deviant can always say, the worry is that the case in which they are acting deviantly is a case that we haven't previously shown. And that's the sense in which they can still be...
That's right.
They can still claim to be right. If
That's right.
Previously shown in that example, it would be definitive.
That's right.
So it seems like we can in a finite amount of time, show someone how to add the numbers 0 to 9. There's finite many.
That's right. If it's just 0 to 9, that's right.
And if we can explain to them the carrying over rule, then we would just show them a finite number of rules that allows them to generate all additions.
You've given a finite number of examples, yeah, but it's when you say, and there's a strategy for generalizing those examples to the new cases, that's where there's nothing that makes you go one way rather than the other, because when you explain what the strategy is for generalizing to future cases, you're just using more signs, and those signs themselves have to be interpreted. And the only way of interpreting them is to look to see what someone does in particular cases. This is really basic, and we'll keep coming back to this. Yeah, 1, 2. Yeah.
So thinking about addition, so you can make addition like plus if you add meaning to it.
If you had meaning,
Yeah. So
Yeah.
is that a way to distinguish it, or is that something problematic and how you can't distinguish it?
I don't really understand what you do this again. You said you can make addition like plus, like quas.
Yeah.
If you
So suppose if I want to make addition like plus, I would say that if x and y are greater than 57 or 57, then their addition of those two numbers equals 5.
that's right.
Like, so if I add that meaning to addition,
Yes. If you said I'm going to define addition in these terms, yeah.
yeah. So isn't that a way? Because you need to add, it needs to like add meaning to addition to make it like plus. So doesn't that show how they're different?
Well, okay, when I set this up, I'm taking it for granted that we all know what we mean by addition, and it's not quas. Yep. But that's really just for the sake of the example. It's like a ladder I'm now going to kick away, because let's take for hypothesis that you mean addition and I mean quas. And then look, is there anything intrinsically different between us? And what I'm saying is, take those systematic rules that the last question was talking about what you do if you add 1, right? You've got that going through your head. I've got that going through my head too. Yeah. And what we say about all the particular cases we've had so far, that's just the same. So, what is destabilizing here is what it comes to that you meant addition. Because there's nothing different between you meaning addition and you meaning quaddition. It actually turns out to be just the same thing when you look at the hard facts about what your mental states were. That's the argument. So you start out with these two different hypotheses, and then you realize there's actually no difference between them. They're assuming just the same things. Plus 1.
I'm not sure if this actually poses a problem for Wittgenstein, but I just realized this. If we're trying to define this one, instead of having a teacher and a pupil, why don't we visualize the function in an objective manner, like creating a Turing machine, so that the student actually sees what the machine goes through when it adds +1.
Right.
And that way, for any x,
Yeah.
for any number we can give the student can check if they're doing it right by
Right.
putting it into the machine.
Yeah.
So that it's no longer a matter of my mind versus your mind, or how we're interpreting something, or the fact that it's coincidence, but it's actually out there in the world as like an objective fact.
Okay, I agree it's a really good idea to think about machines in this context. Maybe train, even a machine that can learn, you could think about how you'd train it. The thing is, it depends exactly what machine you have in mind. Can it handle 27 digits? Can it handle 1,000,000 digits? Can it handle a Google of digits? Yeah. Any machine has its limitations. Yeah.
Well, I mean, if you're talking about an actual Turing machine with like fingers on the key.
I don't know what an actual. You mean an actual? You mean a physical thing that is realizing a Turing machine? You mean an actual concrete object? Yeah. Right. Right.
Then, like for a simple thing like +1, it might take like 50 years to compute, but it would still be able to do it.
Yeah. We'll actually come on to this kind of thing in just a second. Yeah. But the thing is, I mean, not to evade it. The thing is, suppose you took a sum that it would take from now until the heat death of the universe to compute, right? The machine. What answer does the machine give to that? Is it? Well, two questions. Is there a right answer? Well, sure, there's a right answer. But it can't be that what makes it the right answer is that's what the machine would do. Because the machine wouldn't do it. The machine would have evaporated along with everything else. You'll have an opportunity to come back to this. Yeah, it has more mileage. Yeah. Okay, but you see that this is a difficult conclusion to live with. I mean, I've been saying maybe the stuff we've been talking about reference is just a mistake. I mean, if this is right, then the whole class has been based on an even more profound mistake, namely, there's no such thing as meaning in the first place for us to study. Yes? But that is, yes, that is a bombshell. Okay. Well, there's an answer Kripke explores of some length that is actually connected to this thing about machines. He says, couldn't you appeal, suppose we accept that what's different between you and me when you mean addition and I mean coaddition, there's no difference in which answers you actually did give in any past case, and there's no difference in what you had running through your head. But nonetheless, your dispositions were different. Even back then, before I ever dreamt of adding numbers as big as 57, if you had asked me what 57 plus 68 is, I would have said 125. That was always true of me. So even although I never did actually get up to those big numbers, it was always true of me that had you asked me, I would have given the addition rather than the coaddition reply. I mean, that's true of all of us, right? We have endlessly many tendencies to act in lots of different ways. So if you just take, is it clear what I mean by disposition? Just some of the threats and promises, some of the possibilities that we all have. If you do this to me, I'll give you that as my reaction. So for lots of, I mean, just to take, you don't really see my full range of possibilities when you just think about addition sums, but they're among the potentialities that you or I have, right, to answer lots and lots of addition sums. So far, you, and indeed through your life, you only ever get to answer to deal with finitely many addition sums. But your potentialities, your dispositions to act have always been there, and that gives you a way of expanding the talk about what might be fixing meaning beyond just what answers you actually did give and what general formulae you had running through your mind. Oops. So you could say, look, there's all these dispositions. What's 1 plus 1? What's 68 plus 57? Right now, you all along, have had all these dispositions, and you might say my dispositions are different to those of a quadder. Yeah, that's what makes me someone using plus sign to mean add rather than to mean quad. But the trouble with this is that when you look at what your potentialities are, what you will do to answer, what answer you really would give. I mean, after all, you might have blind spots with some particular numbers. It might be that there are some numbers such that if you were to try to add them, your brain actually has a weak spot there, and that trying to add those particular numbers, you'd have an epileptic fit. Right? I mean, that could happen. It could be that we'd have to add, some numbers might be so big that we'd have to add more stuff to your brain before you could cope with them. Yeah? So that's perfectly consistent intuitively with you meaning plus rather than quas. So if you run through, if we take you right now and we say, what answer would you give if we asked you 4 plus 2? Well, you know, your friends gather around and they say, well, that's a safe bet, you could manage that. 6, nope, not a problem. Let's do something bigger, 68 plus 57. That wouldn't be a problem. But let's suppose we asked, what's 37,829,458 plus 4738291? Well, you may, with all due respect, you just might not make it. Your brain might blow up on you at that point. The thing is, that seems perfectly consistent with you knowing perfectly well what addition is. Right? And what matters is not what answers you would give, but given your current understanding of the sign, what answers you ought to give. That's the basic problem, that given the meaning you currently assign to plus, there are right answers to these endlessly many, literally infinitely many questions about addition sums. It doesn't matter if you're not perfect, if you would in fact give the wrong answers in many particular cases, because you're not very good at big sums, because your brain gets tired, because, as people are, I've got a mathematician friend, and whenever he introduces himself to people, they say, I was never any good with numbers. You can be not very good with numbers, so you just give very bad answers once the questions get a little bit complex, but you still know perfectly well what add means, what plus means. So I hope it's kind of obvious that I think Kripke's interpretation here, the negative point that he's making, is really consistent with the kind of picture we were talking about the last couple of times, where if you ask, what makes it the case that you and I, we could put it in Kripke's terms by saying what makes it the case that you and I both mean the same thing by successor, by add one. Well, there are the examples you give, there are the examples I give, but the thing in the middle doesn't do any work. Because if we deviate at any point, we could both have that same thing running through our heads. And our dispositions to give particular answers, I might be disposed to go off the tracks compared to you, around 100, but that might just show that I have a tendency to give the wrong answers once we get to around 100. There seems to be something about what we both mean by the sign that isn't being caught by what answers we'd be disposed to give, what we've got running through our head, or the answers we give in particular cases. But certainly the thing in the middle, that x plus 1 bit, drops out as irrelevant. All we're left with is our tendency to give particular answers, particular cases. Okay? Okay. So let's just go back one more time over this thing about what the implications are of this picture for what you say about truth and reference. The intuitive picture we've been working with is that the meaning of a word is its contribution to the meanings of sentences, and the meaning of a word fixes what it is for a sentence containing it to be right or wrong. So if you take our old example, Sally is tall, you get two parts to that. Sally refers to Sally, and is tall applies to something, that thing is tall. But in these terms, Wittgenstein's challenge is, what does it come to that you know that the predicate is tall applies to something just if it's tall? And what is it to be meaning one thing rather than another by the sign is tall? What do you have to appeal to? Well, you got a string of words running through your head, you got an image of somebody very tall, but you could interpret either of these in endlessly many ways. Any string of words you got running through your head, the question is still, well, what do they mean? Or if you have an image of tallness, that, like the image of the elderly person going uphill with a stick or sliding gently downhill, any kind of image you have could be interpreted in many ways. So you don't have anything running through your head that constitutes you knowing this, that is tall applies to something just if it's tall. This is really just a, how should I put it, it's a kind of really a shimmering fantasy, the idea that there's something like that in your mind. And Kripke's version of this challenge is, how do you know that in the past you used the predicate is tall in such a way that it applies to someone if that person is tall? After all, maybe you meant stall, where stall applies to someone just if it's before Monday, November the 5th, and they're tall, or is Monday, November the 5th, and they're 3 feet high. Right? There's nothing in your past use that means you mean one rather than the other of those. So if you're now confronted with someone and you're asked, are they stall? Sorry, are they tall? I mean, you wouldn't know what you're talking about if I said, are they stall? But if I said, are they tall, and you looked back to your previous understanding of the term, there wouldn't be anything in your previous understanding of the term that demanded that you had to give one answer rather than another. There isn't anything that makes it the case that is tall applies to something if it's tall. And similarly for the term Sally refers to Sally. All that we have, the only hard facts we have, are our verdicts as to the rightness or wrongness of particular statements. We do, in fact, agree in what we say about particular cases. It's lucky we do, because it's only because we do agree in particular cases that communication, civilization is possible. But we don't agree in those verdicts because we understand the term. Our agreeing in those verdicts is what constitutes there being such a thing as a meaningful term here. So nothing to guide, nothing to keep you and me together in saying this one's tall, that one's tall, that one over there is tall. You say that, I say this one's tall, that one's tall, that one over there is tall. The image can't be what keeps us together, so the image drops out. And the string of words is tall applies to something. Just if it's tall, that drops out too. On that bombshell, Kripke tries to salvage the situation, and we'll look at Kripke's positive picture on Wednesday. Okay, thanks. Great questions. Thank you.